on the way, something about the human dimension in transportation. Transportation, not a very sexy subject. Just before I start, 3 problems. I'm a Scotsman, so there's an accent. Second problem, I've got a sore throat. And the third one is I want to tell you everything I know in about half an hour, so there's about 200 slides. So this is the Skoda turbo version of my presentation. And I don't know if we can put the lights down a little bit, just so you see the images a little bit better. But I guess coming to Brno, you know already some of the issues about being a human being and in a city which is, is it a place for cars or is it a place for people? And I think this is what fascinates me, is how to make a city which is really great for being a human being in. And again, if maybe we can ask if in the technical people can put the lights down a little bit, which also means you can sleep if you get bored. But maybe you see the images a bit more clearly. And if you ask London School of Economics, they'll tell you the biggest problem for cities, and finance, governance, population growth, employment, but transport is number 1. And you don't need to be Japanese to understand what this is about. We know about nanoparticles and that all this stuff is bad for us. And these images, which come from the 1970s, we know how much space cars take up and people take up. And so we can maybe use the spaces in our city more efficiently, more effectively. But what is it we measure? What is it we care about? And again, it's very easy to get excited about the big stuff, the big capacity, the big flow. But really what's important is this, the people scale. This small scale about being small, fragile human beings. And how do they work in the city? And again, I'm still hoping we can now put the lights down a little bit so we can get it a little bit darker so you can see the images. So this human dimension, and it's how your life connects to all of this thing of this about transportation, to from your apartment, going downstairs and getting on the bus. And what do you mean by being a human being? And I'm always really fascinated. If you go to Japan, you'll find 4 or 5-year-old children wandering around the city on their own because it's considered safe. And this is, of course, a cultural question. But actually, even for big adults, we're all small, fragile animals, and we're negotiating with these big, hard, heavy metal objects. We can't do anything with lights. Okay, I just see a wall of white, so I don't know if it's okay. Anyway, small, fragile people. And this is outside the main central station in Basel in Switzerland. And it's fascinating because there are 12 tram lines come into the same space. And people just merge with the traffic. And it's amazing. And nobody gets killed. Now, what is this an image of? What do you see here? Okay, it's a Swiss grandmother. We know she's the grandmother because she's quite to be too old to be the mother. We can see she's Swiss because she's got a very grim face. But actually, the real reason she's got the grim face is because look at the boy. I don't know if you can see, luckily you can't see what the boy's holding something. And you have to understand, the boy needs to pee. And this is life in the city. It is the grandmother who really doesn't want the boy to wet himself. And how they negotiate traffic. They're not thinking about crossing the road. They're not thinking about traffic safety. They're thinking about not wetting the pants. And the city is filled with a million of these little stories of everybody doing their own thing. Everybody with their own worry, with their own soundtrack, with their own concerns, their own conversation. And how do all those things fit together? And thanks to the clarity of the rail, we have a sense of security that we know if we stay off the rails, we won't be killed. This fat guy serving in the cafe, he doesn't even turn his back because he knows the tram won't run him over. So it's about having your partner, being friends with transport, being partners with it. So of course it's about democracy. It's about accessing the assets of the city for everyone. But it's also about quality of life. And so that was a long introduction. I want to talk about 4 big subjects, about walking and cycling, about public transport, and how public space holds all those things together. How are they doing with interpretation? Is it okay? Going too fast? We're okay. They're working much harder than me. Okay, walking. So there's more to walking. So now I'll give you chapter 1 is the Gehl Walking School. So what do we know about walking? Swiss children going to school, they've got all this fluorescent stuff on so they don't get run over. What do we know about walking? Well, this walking is what makes us different from all the other animals. Because Homo sapiens, the hunter-gatherers, learned to balance on 2 legs. They freed up their paws to become hands so they could throw a stone and carry a pig home. They can take a mobile phone and drink a cup of coffee at the same time. This ability to multitask allowed us to conquer the planet. Because we're not the fastest animal, we're not the strongest animal, we're not the fiercest animal, but we're the cleverest animal because we can do those things. And the most important day in your life is when you get up on your back legs and you start walking. This is my godson taking his first steps, starting his career as a hunter-gatherer. He saw, I don't know if you can see up here, he saw a puppy. It's up here. He saw a puppy and he got so excited about seeing the puppy, he started walking. And of course his dad started crying. I took my phone out and took a picture and the rest is history. Actually now he's 11 years old. So he's much more interested in cars now. A few more years it will be girls or maybe boys, I don't know. And then a few more years again it will be cars again. I don't know why that is. But human beings, what entices us to walk? We're looking for opportunities, we're curious. Does the street invite us to walk, to explore? Will I find those shoes? Will I find that bag? Will I meet the love of my life on the street? And we're intrigued by all of this stuff. Now this is maybe big architecture. This is a Carrera marble facade in Copenhagen, but maybe the most boring street in Copenhagen. In 1 second, we know this street will give us nothing. There are no puppies here, no shoes. We won't meet the love of our life on this street. So we won't waste our time. And we're actually very, very efficient. We don't want to waste our time. And all over the planet, you can see evidence of how incredibly efficient we are. We're very clever animals. We never waste our energy. We will always take the shortest, simplest route. Because this is what walking is about. And even in the Czech Republic, people do this. And even when the traffic engineers put things in our way, we find a way because we will always go the straightest way. That's the best way to get there. And so why not just embrace that, let people go straight there. No, let them walk the natural way. The other thing is about staircases. Because we're so smart, maybe it looks very beautiful, but it's not very practical. If there's an option of not taking the stairs, we will use it. And anybody who lives in a house with several floors will know that on the bottom shelf, you always have these things that are waiting, because next time I'm going that way, I'll take them with me. But I'm not taking the detour just for the sake of that. So people don't like going upstairs. And this is very important when we start to design environments for walking, that we understand people prefer not to do the stairs, wherever there's another option. And people don't like all those things. And and even if it's only the very oldest and weakest people who have to use those things, because everyone else will climb over, they will run over, whether this is in Colombia, this is in Japan, that everybody knows that it's much easier to walk on the flat, use our energy in a sensible way, in a careful way, and not waste our energy climbing. So, human beings are small and sensual. They are very clever. They use their energy efficiently. The last thing we need to know about as we move around the city is human beings are also very sociable. So what's going on here? A couple of nuns on Piazza Navona flirting with a guy, checking him out. Like, oh wow, those pants look good. What's going on? I mean, I don't know whether this could be the Latin American influence in the Vatican. But there's something fascinating about human behavior. There's nothing more interesting than people. So people looking at people. So man's greatest joy is man. This is why we watch soap opera and reality TV, and we don't watch documentaries about transportation, because people are more interesting. And you'll see the same behavior all over the world. Because when you're comfortable and you're with friends, you want to be on the same level. Like, I'm standing up here like a professor or like a politician or like a priest, and we don't really have a very natural relationship. And of course, if I go down to eye level, things change completely. You don't need to strain your neck to look up, and we can focus. You see things in a different way. And you see, whether you're in India or on the pier in Denmark, the same kind of behavior. But there's a whole thing about distance, because 4 or 5 meters is still quite formal, but as we get closer, it gets more interesting. And you start to notice interesting things. This is my victim here. And when we're at eye level, and when you're at 2 or 3 meters, you can really start to see all kinds of things, because the interesting stuff happens when you're much closer. So the human dimension is about being physically close. And we need to be at eye level, just that difference of 40 centimeters, and being 1 or 2 meters apart and not further apart. So we need to remember that if we want to make a good environment for walking. So, Copenhagen. What about walking in Copenhagen? Well, they had this really crazy idea in 1962 to make the first pedestrian street in the Nordic countries. And everybody said, it will never work, because it's cold in Copenhagen. And it's not our culture. We're Lutheran people. It's not we're not Latinos. And of course, the shops will go bankrupt. If you cannot park your car outside, the shops will go bankrupt. But what they found out was, it was actually very nice. It was very nice to be a human being, even on a cold day, walking around the city. The acoustic level was much lower, so you could have a normal conversation without shouting. You could smell the sausages or the coffee. You could let the children run free. And it was just nice to be a human being in this atmosphere. And although the weather was cold, actually it was nice to be outside, and the shops did very well. And so we've seen these changes happening. This is another street. This is not a pedestrian street. This is just a street which has kind of got a pedestrian priority, which means there are cars, there are bikes, but everybody has to kind of go at walking speed. So that's another way of doing it. And of course, we start saying, well, if we take the cars out, this is New Haven, which is the famous kind of tourist street. 60 car parking spaces were moved. Can you imagine the merchants? They made protests. 60 parking spaces. Well, actually now there are 600 parking spaces for people. Who buys more ice creams? Who buys more beers? 60 parked cars or 600 parked people? And we can start to think what this means. And actually, on a sunny evening, there can be 1,200 people in the space. On average, 8,000 people in a day. There's a lot of ice cream. It's a lot of beers. It's also a lot of community, because all these people meet in the same place. We've got the rich Czech tourists who are drinking beer, the most expensive beer in their life, under the white umbrella. And then there's the local Copenhageners, and they know that you buy the beer in the shop and you bring it with you. But those people are using the same space. And this is kind of practicing democracy, because we can use, it's the same sunset, it's the same water, it's the same music. And it's this pattern throughout the city of taking the cars out and making space for people to walk, to move, to spend and stand time. But it's not all big, sexy projects. Some of the projects about transportation look like this. Very, very modest. This is a side street where the pavement continues across the side street. So the car has to stop and let the pedestrian go first. And it means the car has to be a guest crossing the pavement when they want to cross on the side street. Now what that means is that's a nice detail that makes you feel cared for as a pedestrian. What it means for a mother in Copenhagen, it means her 8, 9, 10-year-old child can walk to school on their own. because they can walk 20 blocks without crossing the street. That turns into maybe an hour and a half a day extra that's freed up for you. So it's kind of this very modest piece of infrastructure turns into something which changes people's lives. More independent, happy children, more independent, happy parents, because their city is more accessible for more people, more times of the day. I mean, it's not rocket science, very simple stuff. Something similar, they've started doing it in London as well. And if you can't cross the street completely, you can make the crossing as small as possible. And again, this is a very simple solution. This kind of bottleneck, this is in Lyon. You can narrow the street at the junction to make it easier to cross. You're in Stockholm, the same thing. In Copenhagen, they narrowed but the street. Here in Lyon, in France, the same thing again. But what you see is happening because the leftover space means there's space for something else to happen. And actually you can start, the cafe can spread out and start using the space so the street becomes a better public space. So safer to cross the street, but it's also becoming a better public space. And these are some examples from Buenos Aires, from Argentina, with paint. Just very simple interventions which make it easier to cross the street. They start to allow for planting to happen, so you have some green, but also the street becomes a public space as well. So very, very simple interventions, which changes the way we use the city, changes the way we spend time in the city. And just with paint, and these were done very quickly with no planning permission, no traffic model. No, these were easily done. And you sort of get the idea. And this is in Mar del Plata, further south. And the same thing. Small interventions, making it easier to use the city, but more enjoyable to spend time. Often in the city, we've got these big, wide streets. And one of the inventions they came up with in Copenhagen was to make this median strip, a sort of strip in the middle, which could allow you to cross the street halfway. And if you know what it's like crossing the street, because if you have a normal street, you've got traffic in two directions, you've got to find the moment of calm when there is no traffic in both directions. And then you have to run like a maniac across to the other side. And that's actually quite hard, and I mean, if you're older, or if you've got a child, or if you're carrying something, that's quite difficult. And so this is this thing, you have to run like a maniac, risking your life. But if we start making it possible to go in steps and you can kind of and stop, you get more chances to cross the street. So if we have these little stops on the way, you can cross the street in smaller steps. And again, it's a really simple thing, but it makes the whole city more accessible. You don't need to walk 300 meters down to the crossing where the traffic lights are. You can cross spontaneously. I want to go to the baker, which is there. So, easy way to do it. In Kensington High Street in London, they've done this. They've put the bike parking in the middle of the street. Are they out of their minds? But actually, since they've done this, the number of accidents has gone down by 30%. And a bit like the Swiss grandmother, not everybody's paying attention to how they cross the street. But this is also about changing the culture of how we use the street. The idea that the street is for everyone, for cars and taxis, for buses, for cyclists, for pedestrians, for families with children, for everyone. The street is a public space. And if we really want to show off, and this is where the Danes get very clever, because the Danes have been doing this for such a long time. And also you have to understand that after the Second World War, Denmark was actually quite a poor country. They didn't have money to build big infrastructure and metros or skyscrapers. So a lot of the projects that were made in Denmark were quite cheap. They made Walking Street, because that was actually really cheap to do and had a huge effect. They made bike lanes, because that was actually a really cheap thing to do and had a big effect. And of course, they've become experts at making street furniture and turning the street into a place to play, to be creative, to have fun. And also they learned that actually adults want to play. And because the time when children spend with their parents is so short, if you don't just make a place for the children to play and the parents can sit, with their phone. If you make a place where parents can play with their children, you'll have a much happier city. You make a place to sit, to stay, to spend time, to enjoy being in the city, making it nice for children at night. And if you make it nice for families with children, this is a very strange Viking custom, where they put the children outside in the cold, and the mothers sit inside and drink cafe latte. And it makes for very strong Viking children. But if you make the city good for families, then families will want to live there. And everybody will want to live there if it's comfortable. So the walking and staying thing goes together with cycling. And why cycling and walking are such good friends is it takes 1 second to get off your bike and become a pedestrian. When you're cycling and walking, you're at eye level. You experience the city, you're in the same acoustic space. You can shout at somebody on a bike, you can't shout at somebody in a car. You can touch them. I mean, you're part of being in the same space. So the walking and cycling goes together. And there's something about a city filled with real faces, not shiny glass and cars, is it becomes a friendlier place. These soft human beings in the traffic, it makes us more comfortable, more friendly city life. But we have to sort out, how do we organize the cyclists, the pedestrians, and the cars? And to make it safe and enjoyable. And we saw a picture from Brno just a bit earlier on. And so I'd like to teach you, this is maybe the very factual part of the lecture, how to make good bike lanes. And what they've learned in Copenhagen and Denmark, and you're going to hear much more about this in the next session, is if you make good infrastructure, better conditions mean more people will cycle. And this is cycling in Copenhagen. And the most important thing here, the grandmother is cycling. This is Niels. He's 7.5 years old, he's cycling. This is his mother, and actually his little sister, Elsa, is just behind them. The grandfather, he's just a bit further behind there. Everybody should be able to cycle. You have to design a system where it's safe from everyone, and you have to convince the mother that it's safe, because she's the one who'll decide for the family if they're going to cycle. Now, what do you know about Scandinavian design? Scandinavian design is very simple. Clear lines. So this is the clean, clear lines of Scandinavian bike lanes. And what we have is the pavement with a curb, the bike track with a curb, the parked cars, and the driving lane. And you cycle in one direction, the same direction as traffic. And this means that everybody feels comfortable on the pavement, you're cycling, and for the car drivers, those poor people in their cars, it's hard enough driving in the city. It's even harder to park in the city. You're so stressed when you finally find a parking space. And then, as you try to park, a cyclist comes. I mean, it's one of the most dangerous moments in the city, is this combination of parking and cycling. So it's very important that we remove the cyclist from the parking equation. So this is very important that the cyclists are on the other side, away from the driver getting out of the car, to avoid that dangerous situation. And it's actually really horrible if you're cycling between the traffic. When you've got traffic on both sides, it's a really stressful experience. It's so much easier and nicer. Traffic on one side, pedestrians on the other. The pedestrians won't harm me. I'm safe with the pedestrians. Cycling in the same direction, no collisions, no, because that's where it gets dangerous. If a car hits you on the side, you break your arm. If you collide with a car, maybe you die. So it's very important we're all going in the same direction. Very simple, very calm, and we can start to enjoy the city. Because you can actually, interact at eye level with the pedestrians. You can see what's happening in the shops. You can see if there's a sale on in your favorite place. And this makes for an environment which makes it fun to cycle, enjoyable to cycle. And so, of course, we have these kind of aggressive men who want to go 100 kilometers an hour. But there's still space for
the mum and her child to cycle through the city, having some quality time together, enjoying cycling in the city. And because we're in the same airspace, if you smell the Danish pastry, you can stop for a break, pick up some wienerbröd, some pastry to take to the office, and be part of the city. It's easy to stop and be spontaneous. And all of this means that in Copenhagen, in the region Copenhagen, more than 40% of people cycle every day. I think in central Copenhagen, it's more than 60% cycle every day as part of their daily routine. And that requires both hardware. Now, hardware is the physical stuff, infrastructure, like these are flexible parking spaces. Or we have these cute little traffic lights for the bikes. And people think, oh, that's so cute. You've got little baby traffic lights for the cyclists. There is an agreement that the lights change. You can see it's green. It's green for the bikes. It's red. There's a 6-second advantage for the cyclists ahead of the cars. Now, 6 seconds doesn't sound like very much. 6 seconds sounds like nothing. But if you imagine it's 8:30 in the morning, rush hour, red light, and then you've got like 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 fantastic seconds when the cyclists are whizzing past the cars. Losers. It's a magic moment every morning, those glorious 6 seconds. Now, actually what it does is very practical, because for the right-hand turn, you get all the bikes out of the way so the cars can turn the corners. Actually, it's a mutual advantage. But it makes people feel good about cycling. Or just having a rest when you stop at the traffic lights, a little support. Or the supermarket that lets you pump up your tires or park your bike. A really great thing. A really great thing is the system with taxis. Now, if you want, maybe the most conservative people in any city is the taxi driver. If you want to hear something really bad about the mayor, ask a taxi driver. You know, and taxi drivers, they're cars, and they're buddies with the other cars. And then you go, we'll buy gas together because we're the cars. The city of Copenhagen made a rule that every taxi has to have a rack to carry 2 bikes. The taxi drivers made a protest, 200 euros for a stupid piece of metal, you know, because those communist hippies on their bikes are never going to take a taxi. But actually, no, I'll tell you a secret about people who ride bikes. They go to parties, they get drunk, they get tired. And when it starts raining, they don't want to cycle home. It's really great to take a taxi home. What the taxis discovered was that actually the bikes were great clients. The cars were not good clients. The other cars are their own taxi. So suddenly the taxi drivers went from being on this really right wing. They became part of a sustainable system of transport for the city. And the taxi drivers started campaigning for more bike lanes because that was going to make the city a better place for people. So the software is about cultural change, education, campaigns, thinking about safety. Maybe the nicest thing is they have a driving test for 7-year-olds. So when they start school, they're able to ride their bikes. So they do all and they're very proud of getting their bike driving license, so they can start school. They learn with the police how to cycle on the street. And as you know, it's cold in Denmark. Sometimes it snows. And the first thing you do is you get the snow off the bike track to let everybody continue cycling. And amazingly, 70% of people cycle every day in Copenhagen, even in the winter. And it's possible. And people cycle to work in their suits. People cycle to the opera. Children, families cycle. Kindergarten, moms and dads. You don't. It's high heels. Cycling is very easy. Pregnant women cycle. This is my hairdresser. Trendy people cycle. You can cycle in the summer and the winter. Why do people cycle in Copenhagen? Well, first of all, we know that we do this kind of test. This was the first time we asked the question. So, do you cycle because you care about the environment? What percentage of cyclists said they cycle because they care about the environment? 1%. Well, is it to save money? 6%. Is it for exercise? Now, this is interesting. 20%. It's my body. This is for me. Or is it because it's easy? More than 60% said they cycled because it was easy to get around. And so, and then if you look at the really big stuff, we can say that actually Denmark saves money. They earn money for every kilometer cycled. If you look at accidents and health, and lose money for every cycle, every kilometer in a car. And if you go to the Louis Vuitton shop in Copenhagen, they've got a bike. And this could be exported to different countries. Melbourne has used the system. This is the British Empire, so it's the other side of the street. The curb is a bit higher because they drive like Crocodile Dundee, but it's the same concept. And in New York, we've done the same thing as well, making it possible to cycle Danish style in the city. Public transport fits in because there's a kind of a hybrid, and I'm going really turbo now because I'm in my last 3 minutes. Bikes is public transport. Imagine if you can cycle to the station, take your bike with you on the train, and then get to your destination and keep on cycling. And this was so successful, they actually had to make bigger bike compartments on the train to make it possible because it was such an efficient way of getting around on the train. Even on the metro, you can take your bike, which is good because that means wheelchairs and other handicapped people can use the metro as well. Public transport, all that's important is moving through the city at eye level, seeing what's going on, connecting with your environment, having encounters. This is in Freiburg, Germany. This old lady didn't vote for AfD because she had this wonderful encounter with different people that looked different on the tram. And this idea that the platform, we don't need to make underground stations. The platform is the pavement. The pavement is the platform. Just get on the bus easily. We can go from the bookshop, the coffee shop, straight onto the tram. And this easy accessibility makes it easy to move around the city. And I don't need to tell you about this because you're a tram city, so you know all about this. And public space is what holds it all together. The place you wait for the bus, the place you get off the bus. The public space can be the place you celebrate public transport. Just the last thing, when we did the project in New York, they said you cannot impose European culture on the United States. Well, actually, it was quite easy because we went from this to this. You don't need to have traveled to Europe. You don't need to have a college education. Everybody knows how to sit down. It's very easy to walk and use the city. The bag lady is still there. It's just like making the city accessible. So all of this goes together. Just recognize all these different little relationships about being a human being in the city and how it connects when we go down the staircase, out onto the pavement, getting on the bus, all of these little relationships where we celebrate humanity. And one final thought, I've got a really stern face. Time is actually very democratic. Because no matter how rich you are, everybody's only got 24 hours a day. If you're lucky, you sleep for 8 hours. You work for at least 8 hours. And you've got 8 hours left to do everything else. And if you're stuck in traffic and you've got your chores, what's left? So it's really important that we use this small amount of time that we have more efficiently, more enjoyably. We can make huge investments in opera houses and in theatres and cultural institutions. I don't know how often you go to the opera. I cross the street 10, 20 times a day. Small, cheap investments that affect our lives every day. Small things that make our life better, more enjoyable, help us connect with each other and the people around us. These are maybe the most important investments we make in the city. So I leave you with the words of John Lennon, and thank you very much.